Hi everyone, my name is Mads, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this video which is going to be the mid-year book freakout tag. This is a booktube staple, we all do it every single year. We're about halfway through the year, we're currently just into July, but I'm going to be wrapping up what have I read to the end of June, the first 6 months of the year, the highlights, the lowlights, how am I feeling about my reading, am I stressed about things I still need to get to? Let's chat it all through. I'll put the questions down in the description, though I'm sure you're all infinitely familiar with them at this point, but let's just get straight into it. So, up until the end of June, I've had a really fantastic reading year. It's had its highs and its lows. I think the low definitely being the ratings I've been giving books so far this year has been a little bit disappointing. I'll talk about that more in a second. But I've read quite a lot. I've read a lot of interesting books, things I wouldn't necessarily always pick up. I feel like I've been broadening my reading taste, whilst also going back to some genres which I love and maybe haven't touched as much in recent years. So overall, a massive success, but let's get into a couple numbers and then the questions. So first up, how many things have I read up to the end of June? I have read 61 things. My Goodreads goal was 60, so we've done that, which is great. But the reason it was 60 was because I wanted to read 48 books and 12 manga, which adds up to 60. Haven't quite done that yet. So I have read 37 books, 21 manga, and then I've got 3 non-fiction, which I count separately. When I'm saying books, I am talking about fiction books. But given that we're only halfway through the year, I am well ahead of my goals and have read so much more than I expected to. I massively lowered my goals this year because I wasn't sure I'd be able to read very much, and to be fair, it is likely to slow down in the second half of the year because I have more going on. But I'm currently on track to read well over 100 books, which is huge for me. But star ratings is where it's a little bit more disappointing. I mentioned this in my quarterly kind of stats video. I normally rate books really highly. I'm basically, if I had a really good time with it, it's got a 4 or upwards, but I've been particularly struggling with finding 5-star reads this year. So in terms of those ratings, I have had no 1-star books, which is definitely good, though if I'm gonna give it 1 star, I'm not gonna finish it. I've had 1 2-star book, 9 3-star books, 22 4-star books, which is good, and then 4 5 stars, which doesn't seem too bad. 2 of those were rereads. So I've only had 2 new 5 stars so far this year, which is not great for 6 months of reading for someone that rates books really highly. But nonetheless, it feels like my reading's on the up, so hopefully the second half of the year will go even better. But let's get into the questions. So the first question is, what is your favorite book you've read so far this year? As I've only had 2 5-star reads, it felt sensible to talk about both of them, which is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara and Idlewild by James Frankie Thomas. So A Little Life, everyone and their mother knows this book. I'll be talking about it more in another question later, but I really enjoyed this. I just thought this was so incredibly well written and handled the very dark, very upsetting subject matter in an extremely realistic and tactful way. I really enjoyed it. It's obviously a massive book. It doesn't look it, but it's over 800 pages. Genuinely, I was so moved by this. I've seen a lot of people have really visceral reactions. I didn't necessarily in the same way, but I think that's because it felt so real. I just thought it was a really interesting depiction of what someone's life can look like. But overall, just an absolutely fascinating read with gorgeous writing that I thought is not in any way, shape or form one I would recommend to everyone. Very much so given the content, but one I'm so glad I read and so glad I saved to this point to read. I think that was absolutely the right choice for me. Idlewild I read much more recently. This was one of the last books I read in June, so it's just snuck in there. And this follows 2 main characters who are at this Quaker elite school in New York, and both of them have almost an obsession with queerness. One is queer, one has a really strong obsession, and it just follows them and their interactions with the world of queerness in very different ways, and being comfortable or not comfortable, and having the terminology or not having the terminology. And the 2 of them meet another pair of people who also have a slightly obsessive friendship in a slightly different way, and you end up with this big 4-sided chaos pit. And it's so interesting. The discussions of queerness in this, I think, were absolutely top tier. I love how it was done. Big fan, loved it, couldn't recommend it more highly. And if you think you're gonna get me to choose between them, no, you're not. Next up was the best sequel you've read so far this year, and I had too few options to choose from, which is not good. I need to be reading more sequels, but we've gone with Reckless by Elsie Silver. This is the 4th book in the Chestnut Springs series. I started reading these, I want to say last year, and I'm really enjoying them. But like most people, I think this was probably, maybe not my favorite in the series, but very close to it. This is super good fun. This follows Winter, who is the sister of the character you have in the first book, and another bull rider. These are all like cowboy bull rider romances in Canada, I think. And super good fun, really loved the character dynamics. Liked how this one felt more adult. Not in smut or anything like that, much more in what matters to you in life and a slightly more serious tone. But I really enjoyed it and very glad to almost be done with this series. Next up is what is a new release you are excited for but haven't got to yet. So I've got 4 options. The first is Moonbound by Robin Sloan. I've been talking about this a bit recently. It literally just came out. I just got my hands on it. And this is a book in the Penumbraverse, which is Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore and Ajax Penumbra 1969, though my mum has read this and said it's actually not very related at all. I think this is like a weird, magical, cozy, sci-fi fantasy vibe by one of my favorite authors, and I love multiple of his books. So I am so excited to get to this and figure out what it's all about. I then have The Woods All Black by Lee Mandello. This is so out of my comfort zone. This is like horror, but I know it's trans story and everyone says it's really good and really weird and really interesting, and it's just a little novella. So we're gonna dive into the world of horror at some point when I feel up to it. And I'm so excited, and I'm also mad I haven't read this yet. Although I only bought it a few weeks ago, I feel like it's one I just need to get to as soon as humanly possible. Another is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I need to read this because I really enjoyed Divine Rivals, and I'm really, really excited for this. I've not heard of as good things about this as I did Divine Rivals, but I'm still intrigued to get to it. But my Fairy Loot edition only just came in the last couple months, so I've not had it for very long, but nonetheless, really excited. And as always, the Fairy Loot edition is just absolutely stunning. But honestly, the thing I love the most is definitely this bit. I'm probably gonna require a Divine Rivals reread to read this, but Divine Rivals I think I read in one day anyway, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then the other new release I really should have got to already, though I don't even own a copy yet, is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I have read all of Emily Henry's previous romance works and all of her other works, and overall really, really enjoyed them, more so as they've gone on. So I'm very excited to get to Funny Story. I feel like I've heard mixed things, and honestly the main reason I haven't bought it is just I don't really want a big UK hardback. So at some point I will get hold of an edition and actually get around to reading it, but it's a bit ridiculous I haven't yet. I kind of thought I'd read it the day it came out, and then I've just not quite got around to it. The next question is, what are your most anticipated releases for the rest of the year, or for the second half of the year? I have 2 very obvious options, both of which are romances, which makes me laugh. I feel like I should always have fantasy and things, but I always seem to have romance releases because of the series I follow. The first is not actually a series, but is The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I have loved multiple of Casey McQuiston's other books. Really enjoyed, obviously, Red, White and Royal Blue and One Last Stop. I liked I Kissed Shara Wheeler, but didn't love it. But The Pairing I am beyond excited for. We have non-binary characters. I think we have less commonly represented sexual identities. I am just so excited. It's summer, holiday, road trip vibes with 2 main characters I think I'm going to be obsessed with. I cannot wait. I have been dying for this book from the day, who knows how long ago, that someone like tweeted Casey McQuiston and said, is your next book going to be male male or female female? And they responded, why do you think those are the only 2 pairings that exist? So the anticipation is real. Cannot wait for that. And then the other one is Daydream by Hannah Grace. I have absolutely loved Icebreaker and Wildfire by Hannah Grace, 2 fantastic college romances. And Daydream follows probably my favourite character from that world that we've met so far, which is Henry. And he is just such a wholesome little bean, and I'm so, so excited for him to get a love story with a Swiftie, which is going to be top tier. Cannot wait. This comes out next month. I will be buying and reading it instantaneously. The next question is, what is your biggest disappointment so far this year? And unfortunately, I have 2. So to be very clear, this is biggest disappointment, not worst read. I enjoyed both of these books, but for different reasons, I found them a bit disappointing. The first is Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. This is book 9, I want to say, in the Wayward Children series. I have so lost count. And I love the Wayward Children series. I specifically love the ones where we go to someone's world, which this one wasn't, they alternate, but we did still get to explore some worlds. But I didn't love this as much as some of the ones I've read, but the reason this was really disappointing is, do you see what's on the cover there? Those are dinosaurs. Do you know what I therefore assumed was quite a big component of this book and the world we might visit? Dinosaurs. Do you know what we saw for about 5 minutes in the last 10 pages of the book? Dinosaurs. So disappointing. Where were my dinosaurs? I'm someone that has loved dinosaurs my entire life, so I was so excited and so let down, even though it was a very good book that I still gave 4 stars. And then another one where what probably disappointed me was actually the expectations I had was Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This was just a case of I've loved other Alison Cochrane books so deeply that when this one didn't quite hit the mark for me, that was obviously disappointing. So The Charm Offensive is possibly my favorite romance book of all time, which is Alison Cochrane's debut. And then Kiss Her Once for Me, I also absolutely devoured. So I didn't dislike this, but it didn't really have the vibes I wanted. It didn't really put the focus where I enjoyed it. Very enjoyable, good fun, 4 stars. Not what I wanted, and I was so hopeful it was going to be such a strong, like, favorite 5-star romance again, and it just wasn't, and that's fine. Next up is What Book Surprised You, and I'm trying very hard to not repeat books where I can, but there are going to be some, starting with A Little Life. So this book really surprised me because I read the first 250 or so pages of this a couple years ago now, I want to say, a year or 2 ago, I can't remember exactly when, and really enjoyed those first 250 pages, but wasn't really sure I wanted to read the rest. I intentionally put it down at that point because I was like, this feels like a nice wrapped up story that ended in a relatively happy place. Can we just leave it there? And I wasn't actually sure if I was ever going to go back to it. And then I decided to go back to it because I was going to New York and it's set in New York and I just felt like I needed to read it. And I am so glad I did, because it did get sad. Obviously it did. That's the point of this book. But I actually ended up really loving it and I really wasn't convinced. I'd heard such mixed reviews. I thought there was every possibility that this book was going to be really not up my alley, but it ended up being exactly up my alley. So definitely a surprise, but a very positive one. The other surprise for me was How to Leave the House by Nathan Newman. This is the ARC copy, apologies. But I loved this book. So the reason this was a surprise is I had not heard of this book at all until I went to the Little Brown Blogger Book Bash, the name's something like that, big event they put on, which was fantastic. And they had some ARC copies of this book and one of the staff there was really pushing it. And the way they described it, they're like, there's a character called Nat West who goes on a 24-hour-long journey because he's had a sex toy delivered to his house and it's not shown up. And I was like, I don't know whether that's going to be a bit ridiculous or completely up my alley. And there was just a few things about the blurb and the marketing they had around it that I was like, you know what, I'm intrigued. And I read it and loved it. This is Nathan Newman's debut novel and I am so excited to see what else they do. I'm getting on to the next question here, but I really enjoyed this. It was so fun and funny, but also very profound towards the end, which I had not seen coming at all and completely surprised me. So this was a complete surprise, from a book I've never heard of to a book that I think actually on reread could end up on an all-times favourite list. And then the next question is a favourite new author, either a debut author or new to you author. Nathan Newman. As I said, I really enjoyed this. I would be so intrigued to see what they put out next. I don't know what they've got planned, but I'm very intrigued and excited for whatever that may be. And then the other author I couldn't not mention is, I'm gonna butcher how you say this, but the author of Ten Dance, Ino Sato, I think. I'm not fully sure how you say it when you've got so many vowels next to each other. I had barely heard of Ten Dance at the beginning of the year, let alone read any of it. 7 volumes later, eagerly anticipating volume 8, I don't think it would be fair to not say that this author has made a little bit of a mark on me this year. This manga, in case you're interested, is ballroom dancing, gay ballroom dancing. You don't need to know anything else. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. The next question is your newest fictional crush, and I think most people say this nowadays. I don't really do fictional crushes, book boyfriends used to be a thing back in the day. I do still sometimes in a romance book really particularly like the love interest, but even still, not for me. So what I've gone with for this, and I stand by this, is all three of the main characters in Evocation by S.T. Gibson, David, Reese, and Moira, all of the above. I'm obsessed with all of them for different reasons. I'm obsessed with how they're obsessed with each other. This little poly relationship and the way it is building, all of them. Obsessed. I'm spoiling one of my later answers, but I needed to, because how can you not be obsessed with these people? Tell me, how? The next question is, who is your newest favorite character? And I found this hard to answer because there's so many books where I love a character when I'm reading it, but A, I have a really bad memory for specific characters, and B, I often like them not because I like them as a person, but because of, you know, something they've done, maybe because they're messy, it varies. So it's kind of hard to answer, but actually quite an easy answer for me is Jin from Boys Run the Riot. So this is this character here, a kind of secondary character. I mean, I love our main character, but something about him is just, I love him so much. So the concept of this is you're following Rio, who is a trans man and at school and has to kind of hide this quite a lot, but does what he can to display the correct side of himself. And basically Jin joins a school who's like a bit of a bad boy, people judge him for certain things, and they become friends. And I just love that Rio is really struggling to talk about it and tell people, and Jin just kind of goes like, well, if you don't tell me that I can't call you the right thing, like, why would I care? And he's just so protective and loving and well-meaning in his own way, and I just really enjoyed him as a character. So we're going with that. I tried so hard not to repeat books, and I've done an awful job at it, but what is a book that made you cry? I did not have the visceral, like, sobbing, screaming reactions a lot of people have had to this book, but it definitely made me cry on multiple occasions. Of course it did. Like, of course it did. The content is really upsetting, but I felt like I was crying more in like empathy with the characters than being distraught myself, if that makes sense. But yeah, unsurprising. Not that many books make me like properly cry, but I'm quite an easy cry with like the climax of a film or like the last few pages of a book where they suddenly have these profound lines. I get like teary-eyed. So there's probably a lot more, but I couldn't think of them, and that's the obvious answer. Next is a book that made you happy, and it has to be The Prospect by K.T. Hoffman. This is a romance following, I can't remember their names, Jean and Louis, and honestly, I just loved every single part of this. Jean is a trans man, Louis is gay and has anxiety. The rep in all of this was just beyond fantastic. They're both minor league baseball players hoping to make it to the majors for different reasons, and they're like rivals from when they did baseball together in college, and then they come back together and form this really adorable friendship, which then turns into more. And I just loved every single second of reading this. It was so wholesome, so real, and so happy. I loved it so much. Highly recommend. The penultimate question is, what is the most beautiful edition of a book you've got so far this year? And I am going with the Fairy Loot copy of Evocation. I love, I don't know where to put it, the green edition that is the normal cover, but I do have to admit that for the vibes this book gives, the red cover does something truly special. And it has the end page art I've already shown you, and these edges are such a vibe. But I think my favorite bit has to be under the dust jacket. It's just beyond stunning. I just think this is such a gorgeous edition for a book I really, really, really loved. I get quite a few kind of Fairy Loot and similar editions, and a lot of them are really pretty, but something about the way the aesthetic of this matched with the story and the gothic vibe it was giving, I just thought was so spot on. So we're going with this one. And then the final question is, what are some books you need to read before the end of the year? I have too many. I have almost enough books to keep me going to the end of the year in this stack next to me, but we're going to talk through them anyway. So we've got books for 3 different categories. The first is continuing/finishing series. So Hopeless by Elsie Silver. This is the 5th and final book in the Chestnut Spring series, so I just need to read it. Like, there is no excuses for not getting this series done this year, considering each book takes me like a few hours to read. It needs doing. I then also have Iron Gold by Pierce Brown. I did read Red Rising Golden Sun and Morning Star this year and really enjoyed them, and I've now bought Iron Gold and Dark Age. I think it's Dark Age, whatever the fifth one is, but I really need to get to them now, and it's so chunky and these books took me so long to read, even in the original ones, which were much shorter, that I'm very, very scared of it. But I really want to challenge myself to at least have read Iron Gold by the end of the year so that I've continued into the second part of this series so I don't let it sit for too long. Next is a Besties book club book. So Christy from Christy Reads back in the day and I basically pick a book to read together each month. And I've actually done a very good job of keeping up with that this year, with the exception of the Hurricane Wars, which is our February book. So obviously I'll have the Besties book club picks for the rest of the year already. But this one I also need to catch up on. I'm very chuffed that 5 out of 6 months I've read the correct book in the correct month, but this one we're not getting to the end of the year and missing one. So this needs to happen. And then the final few books are ones that are on my TBR for 2024. I basically chose 12 books to read this year, ideally being one a month. And I have 5 left, so I'm a little bit ahead at the moment, but I need to get to these and there's some really intimidating ones. So we have Luster by Raven Lalani, which is like a contemporary novel. We have Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam, which is, I think, kind of dystopian-ish. Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. I actually have no idea what this is. I've looked it up so many times and I never remember, but I bought this in 2019 in LA. I've owned it for 5 years. I need to read it. Also because Lauren Groff has a lot of other books which I've heard very good things about, but I'm not letting myself buy or read any other Lauren Groff until I've read the one that I've had for 5 years. Have Seasonal Fears by Shauna Maguire. Again, Middle Game is one of my favourite books ever, and I reread Middle Game just before this came out, which I think was now over 2 years ago, potentially. I can't quite remember, so that I was ready to read this, and then I just didn't ever pick this up. This needs to happen. And similarly, possibly the most embarrassing, A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I love Priory. I got an arc of this months before it came out. It's now been out for over a year and I've not read it yet. So that needs to change. So yeah, that's the remainder of my 2024 TBR. So I need to get to all of those quick sticks. But that is it for this video. As I said, really successful year so far. I'm really excited to see what the next 6 months brings. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book or least favorite book of the year so far is. Let me know how much you've read, how's it all going, just chat to me. And if you don't have anything to say, just leave an emoji that represents a season, be it summer because it's our current season, be it winter because you're ready for us to get back to winter, whatever it is. Leave something down below to let me know that you're here and you watched the end. Like this video if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you want to see more videos from me. I do sit down videos and vlog style videos on roughly a weekly basis. But that's it for this video, so bye, I'll see you in the next one.